Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back. I'm Daze Aghaji, and I'm an environmental activist, also a trustee of the British Pilgrimage Trust. And today we're going to talk about, well, first we were going to talk about the return of the Cunning Folk, but Tabitha sadly couldn't join us because she's fighting the flu, so let's send our praise and blessings. But we do have an amazing panel here that's going to be talking a bit about the Cunning Folk, but mostly going into the witches, which is everyone's favourite topic in this moment. But first, I'm going to introduce the panel, but I would actually get you guys to introduce yourselves. Yes, and don't underestimate each other as well, I think. Or I'll plug in there. So India, would you like to start off with who you are, what do you do, and how does your work intersect with the Cunning Folk and witches?
Hi, I'm India Rakusen. I'm a broadcaster and journalist and, general chaotic mother. That's my general feeling today, of chaos. That's good. I made the series Witch, which is why I think I've been invited here, I assume. And I also do a lot of work around, I made a series called Child recently, which looks at motherhood and children and how we view children, and also the series 28-ish Days Later, which took a whole new sort of big look at the menstrual cycle. So very interested in kind of how we see the rhythms of the world, how we see the cycles of the world, who we are, the stories behind who we are. That's me.
Hi, I'm Ruth Dillon. I'm an artist and I lead on a project called We Are Witch, which is a collaborative needlework project, brings together women from all over the UK who are writers, artists and activists, and we are all creating a panel in a large quilt that honours the different women of East Anglia that were condemned as witches. So that's kind of one of the reasons I guess I'm here, as part of the project which has been rippling further and further out. I did a pilgrimage at Solstice, so we can probably talk to that a little bit. And I have quite a lot of witchy practices of my own, so I guess that's another reason I'm here.
Hello, we're known as the Seed Sistas. I'm Kaz. And I'm Fi. And we're clinicians, we're herbalists, and we have delivered a few babies. And for many, many years, we've been known as the wild and wicked witches. And a few, I'd say probably 15 years ago, we realised that people were scared of the word witch, and they were scared of us embodying the archetype of the witch.
So on one very exciting night, that's a story for another time, we morphed into the Seed Sistas because everybody is connected to seed and food, and we seek ever more creative ways of getting herbal education out into the world. So we're the Seed Sisters, but we call ourselves the Herbal Drama Queens.
And a few years ago, our pharmacology teacher at Middlesex University, Kofi Boussier, told us that the very first law of the ancient Arabic pharmacy was make medicine beautiful. And we've taken that on, and we've decided to work in the world with costume, with colour. Every remedy that we make, we infuse with beauty. And we start healing through observational sense. So when we see something colourful and beautiful, we smile, and that begins the whole process of healing.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing. And I think it would be rude not to ask today. I've seen many different, really beautiful, colourful attires that you two have worn. So today, who are you representing?
Well, I'm Damson, and I'm a bit of a lush, and I've got a little bone to pick with you all because you trendy foraging types, you like to go out and make gin from my older, poorer sister Slow, and you leave me rotting on the trees. And this is my bestie, Apple.
Hello, I am Apple, and you have called me Malus Domestica, domesticated evil. So I don't really trust any of you.
Oh, thank you so much for being the voice of the more than human. So to start this panel off, I think it would be interesting to dive into the conversation around the Cunning Folk, because I feel like most people kind of get what witches are, but may not fully understand who the Cunning Folk are. So Ruth, would you like to kind of like give that larger context of who are the Cunning Folk, how are they perceived?
Yes, I will give that a go. Perhaps not quite as eloquently as Tabitha. It's quite a large shoe to fill in that respect. So we might think of witches now as potentially good witches, bad witches. Over quite a big spectrum, we would use that word. But if we go back in time, if you were a witch, what you did was evil. What you did was against other people. You were hurting and you were causing harm. Cunning folk were the people that you would go to in your community who had the skills to help and heal you. That could be anything from an illness to you'd lost something, or you needed, good luck with something. So charms and spells, but also herbs and herbalism. So at that time, they were really important pillars of the community. They could be men, they could be women. They were involved with midwifery, all aspects of village life, but they were absolutely fundamental and held in great esteem by their community. But some of the first people to be persecuted when people started looking for witches.
Okay, that's really interesting. And India, coming to you, because your podcast was about witches, so you learnt so much about the history. So when do you start to see this divide between the cunning folk and witches? And with witches, how would you define that?
So we never really looked specifically at the cunning folk, but it is really interesting that there is this perception that it was during the witch hunts, and you have to make this really clear distinction that the witch hunts were an absolute it was indiscriminate. There is no evidence that there was a specific attack against anyone. There's been some great work done by historians in Scotland, medical historians, looking at all of the data of the women and the people, men who were tried and burned as witches, and they can't find any evidence that there was more killings of people who were nurses, midwives, medical. They can't find evidence of that. There is evidence that there was sort of more in the kind of literature, the court documents, things like that, that perhaps there was a real interest in the rituals and the practices of people, and that kind of comes up a lot in the court documents. But it's interesting. What I do think is important is that, so in the 60s, a really brilliant paper was written called Witches, Nurses and Midwives, and it was about the prosecution of witches, nurses and midwives as witches, and it used as its main source the Malleus Maleficarum, which was just one of the many witch hunting manuals available, if you were into that sort of thing back then. And in it talks about midwives being the ultimate. I can't remember the phrase, but it's something like midwives are the ultimate enemy of the church, or the ultimate enemy of God. And this was in the Malleus Maleficarum. When it was written, it was like a real, people thought Heinrich Kramer, who wrote it, was a bit of an oddball. He was they're like, you're a bit weird, Heinrich. Weirdly, his witch hunting manual got attached to a papal bull and accidentally became kind of gospel quite a bit after he wrote it. But even though these things are in witch hunting manuals, there's no actual evidence if you then start going through what we have, that there was a very specific targeting. But when people came, during the 60s, there was a huge and really important movement in feminism looking at medical, the ways that women had been treated under the medical system. And a couple of women, Deirdre and Barbara, I've forgotten their surnames, which is terrible of me, coming back to that chaos mother day that I'm having. But they wrote this paper that was super influential, saying that the witch hunts were a specific targeting against the knowledge of women. Now, it's important because in a way, you can dissect the witch hunts from such an angle, definitely, but you can't say, it's just that interesting bit in history where it's we cannot say with confidence that there was a specific, during the witch hunts, targeting of this. But if you look at what was going on at the time of the witch hunts, the Reformation, you've got this massive shift from Catholicism to Protestantism. And in that move, you start wiping out so many of the rituals of daily life. And you have to remember that's also a time where these rituals were not, now we may think of religion, these religions have these rituals, but back then it was kind of seamless. Your folklore was part of the dominant religion, and we probably still have folkloric practices we carry out today that actually have their roots in Catholicism and vice versa. And, you know, it was all much, much, much more seamless. So during these, there was definitely, you know, it was kind of different churches cleaning up their act and trying to prove one against the other. And there was a lot of changes the way of life. And definitely in that, I've been talking for a long time, but swept up in that was definitely like wanting to change the way that people practiced and ritualized. And there was certainly, I mean, I'll stop talking, but certainly there was a change to the way that women were doing very specific things and practicing very specific ways. The witch hunts were not only against women. Lots and lots of men died. It depended on what country you lived in. It was basically the most sort of vulnerable, or the sex or the person who they believed to be the most magical, and women were believed to be more magical. I've rattled on.
No, that's really interesting. And is there a particular reason why women were perceived to be more magical, in a sense? Is it because they held this kind of wisdom and knowledge and ritual and practice?
Yeah, probably, quite possibly. And if you think about childbirth as well, it was so many battlegrounds have been fought over childbirth. They continue to be. Like, birth is really, really political. Has been hugely politicized from like day dot. And there were loads of like probably really powerful, important medicinal rituals that were carried out in childbirth that got like crushed out because they were too Catholic, or they were too, you know, they didn't sort of, I mean, Kaz and Fi would definitely be able to talk to this better, but there was during the time of the witch hunts, there was a change in the way that medicine was seen, and there was a decision about who could and couldn't practice it. And there were organised bodies of mainly men, physicians, surgeons, things like that, who started to say, actually, you don't practice this thing we are creating. Not creating, it was created a long time ago. But you don't practice this thing we are now calling medicine, and it does not belong to you. And there was a pushing out of, certainly, of women from that.
And as our modern day, you know, witch, herbalist, cunning folk, what word would you identify most with, and why? And how does that link to your practice as herbalists?
So India's alluded to some of it there, but one of our studies, my dissertation, was the history of contraception in abortive plants, and that led me to have access to some of the Vatican Library, and reading about why the church was so anti this knowledge was about their need for an increased population within each parish under the particular faith that was there, Catholicism at the time. And the oppression and suppression wasn't just humans, it was of the plants. And here, in these chaotic European lands, we have plants that open our consciousness and help us to connect with divinity. And we've seen a resurgence over the last 20 years in herbal preparations that come from the Amazon or Africa or frogs, you know, and people can sit in circle in church halls drinking ayahuasca with medicine people from other lands. But the herbs from here are demonized, and when you look at some of the herbals written, the way that the authors write, they call them malodious, ugly plants, and they're talking about datura, mandrake, henbane, belladonna, some of the most important medicines we have in our dispensary. And if you think about those cunning folk back in the day, we as humans suffer from pain. And one of the most important actions that herbalists need in our dispensaries is anti-inflammatories, antispasmodics, anodynes. And these plants hold those keys to that medicine and were prolific.
The story of the witch hunts, where, as India said, it wasn't, as we think of it today, targeted knowledge, but there was something going on that was the rise of surgeons and medicine as a profession rather than as a vocation or as something that was learned from passed down through generations. And it became a cash cow. There was money in it. And the surgeons wanted people to come to them for their medicine, And it was also this battle of herbal knowledge being suppressed with the rise of the surgeons. And those herbs that Kaz was talking about were actually the first herbs that were used in surgery. They were the herbs that were in the soporific sponges that were anaesthetics, early anaesthetics. And that knowledge was really complex, varied knowledge about how to know how to underpin some of those herbs with herbs that would support and protect against some of the potential pitfalls. This wasn't just like, ooh, it's an old wives' tale or it's a bit of folkloric medicine. This was deep knowledge that was known by medicine people of that time that was taken and started to be applied in, the surgeons' universities in Italy and in some of the monasteries over here. So it was. We think of it as one thing, but actually there was a lot of different political, religious situations going on at the same time.
And just to speak as well to the very first drug law that was ever passed globally was the Munich Beer Purity Law. So back in the day, our water wasn't safe to drink, so everybody fermented, and we fermented vastly with Henbane in Europe, Bilsen or Pilsenkraut, and mugwort. And these herbs are connective, they're opening, they help to join us together in community, and taking all of the herbs out and making the law that the only herb you're allowed to brew with is anti-testosteronic and a depressant, hops.
And Bilsen was the home of Henbane. And we still have Pilsner today, which the origins of are from Henbane. So these herbs are still there in our consciousness without us even realising it, working their magic.
That's really beautiful. And we've talked a bit about the history, but how has your work been this kind of continuing of this lineage?
Well, we did a 4-year, full-time, really medicalised degree. We were taught by allopathic medics. We wore white coats and had stethoscopes. And we came out of our degree and we set up a little herbal stall down at Hitchin local market. And people didn't even know what herbal medicine was.
They didn't know what nettles were. They didn't know that acorns come from oak trees. They didn't know what a herbalist was. They said, do you sell drugs?
Do you grow cannabis? Or is it like homeopathy? Because there was the Royal College of Homeopathy, which didn't mean that there was necessarily an understanding of what that was, but the word homeopathy was in the consciousness. And we just found this like a travesty that, you could do a 6-week reflexology course and you'd have people queuing up to get their feet massaged every week. But we'd done a 4-year medicalised degree. So we realised that actually what we needed to do was change the paradigm of knowledge and understanding of medicine and help people reconnect for simple conditions. We often talk about walking past sage in your garden with a sore throat and going to the GP and taking up 10 minutes of their time, and the poor NHS that's eaten itself with our dependency on it. And just taking some of that power back. So that's been our work for 25 years.
We were rigorously scientifically trained, but we practice magic, and we have revived the ancient flying ointments of our European culture, which involves wanking rituals. And this is part of our cultural heritage. And people have still got so much shame about our sexuality, our sex, our body, our connection to divinity through sex magic. And being able to translate magic into science is something that we are lucky enough to have a language to do.
That's amazing. You can see the English shaming me as I hear sex magic. I start to giggle like a schoolgirl. So Ruth, you've kind of alluded to some of your work and how your work connects to witchcraft and being a bit witchy, but also the rite of pilgrimage as well. Would you like to take us through, what was your journey through these understanding of self-identifying as witch also, and then going on this pilgrimage? And, what was that experience like?
So I felt very strongly that we wanted to honour through walking. The women we honour are based in East Anglia because I'm based in East Anglia. So all of my work is coming from the land that I live in. And I think we've talked a lot today about how we connect to land, how we listen to land, and that can be all the beings of it, but also the people and the ancestral connections of it. So while they're honouring contemporary women throughout the UK, the women we are honouring are East Anglian. I wanted to walk and hold them with me as I did that. I've done a few pilgrimages in the past, including a long time ago, one with Pilgrimage Trust. And some of this is quite hard to articulate, not least being a tired mother as well, but also because some of this is beyond rationality, beyond words, and finding vocabulary to share is sometimes quite challenging. But I was very much called to walk. I have a beautiful friend who's a folk singer, Eleanor Dale, who also made one of the panels. I invited her to walk with me. And we decided we wanted to inhabit a space, a liminal space of understanding and honouring with these women. So we chose to do it on Solstice, and we chose to do it dressed in 1600 clothing, which we made. And every single one of those stitches links us to these women. The dyed linen, the herbs that are used, the madder, all of the things that come into that, all these very small, potentially very small things, amount to being a huge honouring and connection. So we set off, we spent an incredible night. I would have to say I wanted someone to document it, but I didn't necessarily feel a traditional documentary style was the right thing. So I put it out there, and an incredible sound artist, Charlotte Arculus, joined us as well. Not in full 1600 clothing. I think she was wearing mostly purple, including her hair. And she came with us, so it was the three of us. We spent our first night in the most incredible chapel on Solstice evening, and Eleanor sung throughout at different places. I carried a scroll of the women's names, and we stopped and we recited, stood on that land and brought their names back so they're not forgotten. And I think there's a lot of talking of the men that persecuted, and I don't even speak some of their names because I think it's much more important to talk about the women. So we walked the River Yar. I was looking for a place to go on pilgrimage where we had a place of initial trial, incarceration, execution, and burial. And that's really quite hard to find because most of the women were buried in unconsecrated graves. But I found that within Yarmouth. So we walked the course of the River Yar, arriving in Yarmouth, and things like there's a point that Charlotte calls the Great Confluence, which makes it sound incredibly beautiful, where these rivers join and then go out to the sea. It's the most industrial place you'd ever know. You know, there's the arches of McDonald's there, and, you know, all of this, you know, I don't know how many of you know Great Yarmouth, but, you know, there are some real moments, but actually in that juxtaposition, it felt even more important because we had walked hardly meeting anybody, actually, on this blazing hot day along the river. But then suddenly we were walking through Great Yarmouth dressed in 1600 clothing, getting very strange looks and lots of questions and everything else. Yeah. But bringing it back to what we've been talking about today, within the context of that pilgrimage, we did quite a few ceremonies. So that was gathering water from the river and taking it back to the sea. That was reciting the women's names. It was having song. And then we did two services, one with a dear friend from a Wiccan tradition on the beach, but then one actually by one of the reverends at the Minster, where these women are buried. And I, to this moment, am more proud sometimes that I got them involved than anything else, because quite often when you talk to people within churches, understandably, they're concerned about finger being pointed at them or potential PR story, but she was absolutely incredible, and her words resonated so deeply to actually take some responsibility for what we had done historically, and that persecution of any sort doesn't have a place within that faith and moving forward. So I hope that
That must have been like a really transformative, like even hearing it, it's like my heart is like, it breaks and it feels so full all at the same time. It must have been quite an emotional journey to go on.
Yeah, I mean, when I started the project, I kind of thought the quilt would be done by now. It's not done. In fact, my husband's forever saying, when are you actually going to make the quilt? And I'm like, you're missing the point. It's the journey, and I've not got a specific deadline. But more people have come forward and said that they want to join in, and so of course I'm letting it have the life that it needs to have, and we move further forward with it. But one of the things that took the longest was the research, and I'm sure you can completely relate to this, because you're right, they're ordinary people. There are some very specific things, but when I was doing research into each of their stories and finding a contemporary woman and actually looking for the resonance between them and pairing them up, like the post that I've just done actually is about a woman who was executed with her 9-year-old daughter in 1716, so really like coming to the end of it. In fact, I believe they think it's the last person in the UK. But the person that accused her was her husband and the father of that girl. So this is how much these deeply held beliefs can be within community, that even a family would be ripped apart in that way.
Yeah, wow. In India, I feel like coming to your work, because you spent a lot of time with different witches from global perspectives, local perspectives. How was it like almost being the conduit for their voice in this way, and like learning about, you know, all of these like amazing histories, both past and present, and also feeling the, you know, great responsibility to be able to do it justice?
I felt like I was sort of such a layperson traipsing around being like terribly jealous of all these people. I think when you were speaking, it reminded me of a couple of things. And one of them was being on the bank of the River Ayrshire in Scotland with a witch called Gary. And just realising as he talked what he had through his practice in witchcraft and the people that he practiced witchcraft with was kind of like augmented reality glasses. And it was like this, all of the rituals, all of the understanding of the plants, the nature, like he had worked for the Forestry Commission for ages, understanding of the birds, what he was seeing on this walk. He was seeing layers and layers and layers of other things that I couldn't see. So not just kind of like a biological, like an understanding of the ecology. It was also this type of rock represents this flower can be used for this, and I was like, wow, this is amazing that you can kind of like walk through this land and have this totally different understanding of it. That really stood out to me, and also speaking to lots of people who have recently kind of become witches or, you know, identified as witches, it all seemed that all of them had gained a new understanding of their place. They all had become more interested in their surroundings, whether it was what's growing in the hedgerows, the damsons and the apples, whether it was where people who'd been tried as witches were closest to them. That was always a real interest for them. It was a sense of an interest in the history of the land suddenly that was, and whether it was industrial or not, you know, it used to not be industrial, what lies underneath this concrete. And I think that was one of the most striking things for me going on. It was a little bit of my own sort of pilgrimage going through this journey and looking at the witch, because at the beginning I thought maybe I would like to be one. I'm not one, spoiler alert. Do still listen to the podcast. But I'm not actually, I don't identify as one, but there is so much that I think it's just because I haven't found the time to sit down and properly do it, which I'm sure all these guys be like, that's such a load of bollocks, India. What are you talking about? But I've learned so much. A lot of people are turning to something which is just at the heart of it, a deeper, proper understanding of the world around them.
No, I definitely feel that as well, in this like crisis of belonging that we see. It is this like, how do we anchor ourselves into something that feels safe, or at least known? And I think rituals play that part because it creates almost the rhythms that we have lost again. And yeah, with the Seed Sistas as well, a lot of people come for you in those times of crisis. You are the cunning folk of the modern day, quite literally. How does it feel to kind of teach people how to heal themselves and how to build this level of ritualism and see the world in a different way, and see like the aliveness of nature and animism? It must feel like amazing in some ways, but also so sad to see where we went and how we're having to come back to something that we, I guess, should know already.
I think what's interesting and what we're learning recently is that we can't be nuanced to reach a wide audience. So for many years we've been nuanced, and a particular pet bugbearer is the words nature connection or we are nature, which is now part of our narrative. Because when we go outside, we walk past the nettle and we have a lifelong relationship with nettle or the dandelion, the hawthorn berries that are out at the moment. We work with these plants and these plants are our friends. We have deep, intimate relationship with a few of our local plants. And that's something that it takes too long to share. So we're having to reach for sound bites because we run a social enterprise, and the aims of this social enterprise is to change the paradigm through connecting people to their local mates, those plants that can help them in all kinds of times. And as human beings, because of the way we've been brought up to see ourselves as centre and the top of the hierarchical chain, it's hard to find the right language. So that's something we're struggling with quite a lot.
I actually feel like this is a brilliant opportunity because you're all interested in walking and being part of nature. And these characters were born of a project called Voices of the Hedgerow, which was connected to a pilgrimage that Jolie set up. And she's pilgriming at the minute, which is why she's not here. And it was to educate families and people along the way of her journey about how the hedgerow can come alive. And any walk to the local school, to your local park, or a deeper pilgrimage is surrounded by these green friends that we often just see as a sea of green. And like whenever you're pilgrimaging, if you can even go with a flower key, so when you see something and you're like, what is that? You've got something to reference it to help to get to know and understand. And yeah, all opportunities for what is now called nature connection need to be taken, really. And when you're walking, especially, I talk about this it was last Halloween, it's also my birthday. I was walking along an old drove in Dorset and I was having a bit of a blood sugar wobble out and I had nothing on me, but there was a load of damsons and rose hips in the hedgerow, and I was nibbling on a rose hip and I got to the seeds of the rose hip, which are really, I don't know if you ever dropped them down your brother's jumper when you were a kid, itching powder. You don't want to eat them. I've got a brother, I used to do that. And I dropped the seeds further along the drove. And I thought, we always talk about the birds being the pollinator and the ones that carry the seed. And I thought, we're just part of the picture. And we've forgotten that. And pilgrimage is actually a brilliant opportunity to just get back with the programme of like, we're part of this and nature can feed us and it's reciprocity, we can support nature and then we can lose all of that thing of nature connection. We just get back to it. And I think it's really like a privileged position to be able to take that time to walk amongst those plant friends. And then you're never alone.
And I was going to say we are in a privileged position because we do know the names of our flora and we do understand how they interact with our bodies and our health and the health of our pets and our loved ones. And right now, hawthorn berries, part of our vast Rosaceae family, are out in abundance. And something that we saw during the COVID time was a lot of people had problems convalescing. After getting ill with that particular virus, it took a really long time for people to get their breath back and their hearts back into sync. And Hawthorn taught us at that time that a simple decoction where you boil up your berries and simmer them for a while puts so much good energy back into our bodies, literally strengthening our heart musculature and supporting all of the blood vessels. And we saw it en masse. Because a lot of people come to see us, we can collect that information and the data and share with other herbalists. We saw hundreds of people get better from simply drinking hawthorn berries a few times a day.
I think that actually is part in answer to your question as well, because it was at that time that we suddenly, our inboxes were inundated with people going, oh, you know that information you've been trying to ram down our throats for the last 15 years? Can we get on board with that? And that, it was in a very strange time, but people actually realised that we can't be dependent on the outside, that sometimes we have to look much more locally in our own gardens, or even in the cracks in the paving stones.
There's actually a book they read, I won't be able to remember the author's name, but it was about like energetic herbalism. You might know it, and the kind of thesis was all the plants that know that you need them will grow around you. And I find it quite funny in this like space of where, especially in London, it's like constant hustle, bustle, grind. Your body's never quite resting enough in order to go back into full health. And hawthorn berries grow abundantly. So there's something in that I thought was quite magical with what you were saying.
Can I really quickly do a plug for you guys? In the obviously your books are totally brilliant. Their books are absolutely amazing. They're fantastic. But they've also is it out, your oracle deck?
Yeah.
It is, yes, fully out.
Yes.
They've got this lovely oracle deck in terms of like learning about plants. If you're into tarot or oracle decks, or you just want to learn more about plants, I loved it. I tried it a few times, and one of them, I remember once I was like asking this particular question, and mint came up for me, and I drank so much mint tea that week. I was like, but it just like really grounded me in the question and the thought that I was having, and it was really wonderful. So I would highly recommend seeking out Kaz and Fi stuff. I don't generally plug stuff, but your books and oracle deck, it's really totally brilliant. I was also going to say, I think with witches, another thing was this kind of heading out and pilgrimage and I think a lot of people are looking for an excuse to get out and roam the land, and sometimes they have to have an actual date in the diary, which is why the witches' sabbats, there's loads of them, and there's like mini sabbats, and there's like you can put all the dates in your diary, you can fill up your year. But I think it's hard, isn't it? Today everything is chaotic, really busy. If you don't live out in the countryside, whatever we mean by that, you do have to find the time and the space to get out there. So I think it's quite helpful having that structure and that diary for it.
No, I definitely agree. And even with your podcast, 28-ish days, I also find like the moon cycles and seasonal cycles as this way to kind of, because I'm very much into astrology. My partner thinks it's absolute donkeys. But I think the conversation I had with him was telling him that it actually is almost like a calendar reminder for me to go, what am I letting go of? What am I taking in? And whether I believe in the stars actually guiding it, that's another question. But in actuality, just having that framework and almost creating those rituals of engagement and time to have space for, that magic in our life, because it's there.
There was a placebo woman who's totally brilliant. I can't remember her name. She specialises in placebo. But we were talking about magic, and she was like, honestly, anything, if it doesn't do harm to other people, it's great and it works. And she's I can't remember where she's at some American university. I don't know what I need to know, but she's totally brilliant. And she was like, there is such good evidence for the power of our own belief in things that, it is magic. It's not even belief; it's the thing that can happen.
That feels very magical. And before we go into audience questions, I kind of wanted to ask a final question around, because I know the obvious answer is pilgrimage, but in this time, just to start it off. Yes, like in this time of where people yearn for this ritual, this magic to life, this seeing the world in a very different place, do you have any personal practices that you use to connect to, ritual, place, land, magic? And would you like to share it with anyone? Yes, India, the non-witch starts.
Text Daze around every October and ask her when to harvest rose hips, and then constantly badger Fi and Kaz and be like, no, I don't personally have any. I do really like to make rose hip syrup.
Yeah, and
but
that was actually one of the first things you
I
spoke
don't have
about.
a kitchen available. So yeah, this is our main
yes,
point,
I don't
first
know
point
when
of
to
contact.
pick it and everything.
But I do think that I like to have. Silvia Federici once described this idea of like women have a sympathetic. She was talking historically. She was talking about the commons, and she was saying that in the commons, which I know can be sort of like a bit rose tinted glasses, etc. Blah blah blah, but really important magical spaces that were available. But she says that women in the common lands before enclosures took them away had existed in a kind of like sympathetic magic. And that's a kind of phrase that stays with me, in that I love I don't feel that you have to like hard identify as anything. I feel like you can kind of be with people and sort of seamlessly move in and out of that and not have to be, one specific way. But I just like to kind of do things with a bit more meaning ever since making Witch. I'm like, I can add meaning to making this soup or making this rosehip syrup, or I am way more, because of Fi and Kaz, way more interested in the power of plants, and I wish I had the time and the courage and the knowledge a bit more to go out and engage with that a bit more, but yeah. An actual witch.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is an interesting one, because I'm probably only just going, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, no, I know I am, and I'm sort of, I'll take that now, okay, I'll own it. But it's been a long time of doing all these small practices, but like you said, it doesn't matter. You don't have to put yourself in any box. Other people will do that really happily for you, and you can just, choose who to listen to and who not to. But we were talking about busy lives, weren't we? And while it is the most incredible thing to go on a pilgrimage, and a long pilgrimage, actually the more powerful thing is to set intentions and work daily. And I fail miserably to be in any way spiritual about loading the dishwasher and doing the mountains of laundry. Like, I'm not going to pretend I've got that. But other things, it's a daily practice, and recognizing I am absolutely privileged now to live in Norfolk by the coast, so I have a deep relationship with the sea there and with the seasons. But I was in London for 20 years, and I still found places and ways to do that. And that's about slowing and observing and checking in and listening, because they all talk. They just talk a slightly different language and potentially a bit quieter. And I'm lucky enough to be part of the Animate Earth programme, and it has taught me so much about different approaches to feeling into something that we have been severed from, but is deeply, deeply within us all. And I think there's that hunger and that looking and that longing, and whether that's for ritual or, it's always been there. We go back and we find evidence of that all the way back through our evolutionary past. But it can be small. It can be, make a cup of herbal tea with something that is in season in the garden. It can be grow something yourself.
Stir 3 times and tap on the side.
yeah, exactly.
So our practice is sensory herbalism, and we all possess this incredible body, and when we are embodied and work with our senses, we are attuning to what our ancestors attuned to. Why we have this huge weight of literature and understanding about medicine is because those who've gone before us have done observation. So through observation, through our sight, smell, taste, touch, interactions, is our magical practice. And it's been such a privilege because over the last 20 years we have sat with many, many different people, and we do something called a blind tasting, where everybody gets a cup of some herb, but we don't tell anyone what it is. And through people letting go of being right, because you cannot be wrong when you're just tapping into your own senses, we've gathered information about the exact phytochemistry of the plant through their senses, through their smell, taste, and observation. And that is something that we all have to slow down for, and the words rushing and chaos have come up quite a bit. And the practice is breathing and coming into our own bodies and sensing who we share this beautiful world with.
Yeah, and within that idea of plotting your place in the world according to what's growing around, and just even on your walks, wherever you're going, just seeing, noticing in a different way what plant is growing between the cracks, what's growing in that bit of wasteland. And then when you come back inside, you're still connected to all of that going on around. And that just, the magic opens up then, because you are in relationship with our plant kin that grow from the land and interact with the mycelium and are fed by the rivers and the water that comes down. And we always say the more people become aware of the plants around them, the more they want to protect and support them and diversify the green spaces. And, we get really upset when there's no diversity in nature, when you walk in, vast swathes of woodland that haven't got the seeds to regenerate what's growing on the woodland floor. And it just brings us back to ecological activism when you care about what's around you. And if you start working with plants for medicine, you want diversity. You want them within your locale and your environment, and you'll drop seeds from up the river down lower and see what comes of it. And it just, it brings us into contact, and also this part of ourselves that wants to protect and create. And so plotting what's around you is a really good magical practice.
I was just going to add really, really quickly, sorry. That what I meant to say, I was like, on the way here, I must talk about awe, because that really relates to pilgrimage. But you may be aware of this, and you guys will hopefully be able to help me here with the finer details. But there's some amazing research going on in Keltner's lab on awe, and he's a specialist in awe, the impact of awe. And what they're finding is that the sensation, the feeling, the emotion of awe actually reduces, you said phytokines, but I think it's cytokines that for awe. Is that right? That reduces inflammation? Or increased cytokines reduce inflammation? Is that right? Have I got that right? You're looking at me like, no. Just speak. Oh, God. Anyway, I thought that's so, I was talking to my partner about this. I was like, isn't that amazing? If you feel awe, it reduces inflammation in the body. And he was like, that must have been what pilgrimages were about. And I was like, that makes so much sense. To go on such a big journey and to come to something, or to pass things that you feel in awe of, or to come to this thing that you have been working towards, to work for yourself, to muster the sense of awe, actively is healthy for your body, which I just think is totally amazing. I completely forgot to mention that at the beginning, sorry. Relates to pilgrimage.
I think it does, because awe is so important. And I find it funny how sometimes you literally just need to go outside and look at the world just for long enough to be like, wow. Because I always find that. And you can do that in a city park. You can even kind of do that outside, even just looking out now. I'm like, isn't it wonderful that these plants just grow, and give so generously, and it's beautiful.
I think it makes us feel less important as humans as well, or it shrinks us down, doesn't it? And gives more reverence to the world around us. And I thought you were talking about ore, like iron ore. I was like, ooh, some new research in plants bringing up ore from the ground. yeah, I'm with it now.
Yes. And on that note, I think let's go to audience questions so we can take a few, but they have to be questions and they have to be quick. Okay, you'll go first.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. I hope you don't think I'm sucking up to the panel a bit, but maybe I am going to suck up to the panel, because I'll be as quick as I can. So
doesn't need to be quick.
I think the problem that we've been talking about today, in a way, is patriarchy, that we have to bring down the patriarchy, and the system of patriarchy, the main one is capitalism, which puts profit before the sacred, before magic, before beauty. If it makes profit, we do it. If it doesn't make profit, even if it makes everybody's lives immiserated, we go ahead, and that seems to be part of the problem. So bringing down the patriarchy, if I could connect to something else, you mentioned this genocide against women and children, and there's a genocide happening at the moment in Palestine, which hasn't been mentioned yet today, and a pilgrimage called the Global Samud Flotilla, which has been attacked last night by Israel and was abandoned by the military escorts, and maybe one boat got through. And they're taking...
With 44 citizens represented from 44 different countries.
People, yeah. And they were taking baby formula, because most of the victims of the genocide are women and children, and the babies are the first to be starved to death. And it just seemed like an elephant in the room, that people talked about pilgrimage as a sort of activism, and but nobody had mentioned this. What I think is the ethical issue of our times, and the most important pilgrimage that is going on right now, that has just been crushed by patriarchy, which is behind colonial settler occupations, which destroys the hedgerows and, gives us monocultures, all for profit. And I just wondered if you could say something, if you could answer that as a question. What do you think about this Global Samud Flotilla
Perhaps I can just talk
pilgrimage?
to a little aspect of it, and that is that a few people have talked about We Are Witch and said, isn't it a really important thing to honour, what happened? And they think it's a historical honouring project. And I feel so strongly that if we don't understand the contemporary relevance of what we're talking about in the witch wound and the legacy of that persecution for all of us, then we've really, really missed something. And you can take that here and you can ripple that out and you can keep going globally on this. But yes, I fundamentally believe that those, pillars of capitalism and patriarchy are at the root of so many things that we need to work on and heal in this world.
Yeah.
I was going to say, this is our response. So Fiona and I met when we were very young adults. I'd been on the road protest not far from here, the first at Salisbury Hill and then Leytonstone, and I was full of rage because I'd been standing, chaining myself to trees, training myself to diggers, being physically manhandled. And when we first met, we realised that this rage needed to be transmuted into something that we can create change. So that's why we set up our social enterprise. That's why we do the work we do. We want to harness our power in the way that we can see making positive change. So we do that by this work. And the sense of powerlessness that comes when we see these huge monolith organisations doing so much harms us. So we don't have an answer. I mean, I was tuning in, watching the live feed of the flotilla, watching it happen, live streamed, as a lot of us have been watching a live streamed genocide. My family are Jewish. They came here after the war. they're survivors of camps. I don't have an answer except for to transmute my rage into educating people how to love nature. That's my work.
It's all very interconnected, I feel. Because I mentioned I was an activist, and I started off in Extinction Rebellion, where I was a strategist for many years. I recognise that there is something deeply moving about these issues, but through going through that whole journey of doing similar gluing, planning other people to glue themselves to different things as well, I realised that coming back to recognising this deep sense that everything is sacred around us in general is the only way that people could truly understand the horrors of the world and find their agency within changing it. And I think it does connect back to nature, because you mentioned the enclosures, that first bit of disconnection that we see actually.
Roman invasion.
Thank you. Even better. Exactly. It's like this constant disconnection that shows itself in many different iterations all across the world, localized, globalized. It's all the same root trauma, and I do think it's like having this kind of like moment to be, to think, to decide who you want to be in this moment, and also to find your calling of why you were placed here at this particular moment.
And activism is exhausting. A frontline activism, it breaks people, it breaks families, and it can be a very edgy place to be. You're sticking your head above the parapet. People have died. And we've been at threat of going to prison before, and always thought it would help raise the profile of our work and all the rest of it. And then had young families and, are like, what are we going to be able to say from prison? And made a very active choice at that time that our activism would be creative resistance, and have created our whole social enterprise around that, which also involves educating people that are frontline activists to care for and nurture themselves. And lots of herbalists are working to set up herbal clinics where there's been different activist camps and things to provide herbs that help you to protest without burning out. And all of that herbal education is a big part of activism, because if we burn out, we can't help anyone. So the work of herbalism is, it's deep in the activist world in different ways as well.
Yeah.
Just really quickly on that, it's sort of hard to answer it not being a question, but like the horrors of this genocide, what I definitely think we see is people kind of scrabbling for answers, and also it's so heartbreaking and kind of beyond, and so out of reach. We're so cut off from it as well. And I think I definitely see around me, and for me personally, this like feeling of meaning slipping away. And I think what we mustn't do is lose that completely, and trying to like stay with the story and trying to anchor ourselves, our awareness in whatever way that is. I mean, these guys have kind of said it all, but there's a work to be done in not derailing ourselves with the horror that is happening, and trying to work. There's what is the answer? But like, it's a lot. It's huge.
And I think
thank you for bringing it up.
I think it's a really important point to bring, and I think maybe what you're suggesting is, let's not pretend we're in this fantasy perfect world where we can just go on pilgrimage and make everything all right, that there's some serious work to be done as well. Is that part of the point?
And I think the work to be done is both external and internal. And that's, I think, what pilgrimage can deliver, is this place to actually decide who you decide to be in this moment. And on that note, we actually have run way over time. And I know this is such an important conversation. No, we've run way over time, yeah. I'm so sorry, girls. But thank you so much for bringing that up. And thank you so much for holding space for such a moving and deep conversation. Thank you so much, audience, for listening and holding that tenderness and grace as well. Thank you, everyone. We're going to break.
Don't stop your journey here. Unlock more potential with this recommended content.